Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Right, shall we kick it off?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Steve, welcome to the podcast. Finally, welcome, my friend. We've had so many goddamn conversations. Every time we have a chat, I'm like, oh, God, I wish we'd have been recording that. So finally, we have our first opportunity to have a chat. How are you, brother?
Very good. Likewise, Pete. Yeah,
you are kicking ass, taking names.
Passing the night, haven't we?
I know.
And other people have tried to get us together with shine their torches in our direction. So it's great to be here, man. I've got a lot of respect for what you're doing and the platform on which you're doing it, which brings some nuance back into the world and some deep diving into stuff. And as a researcher and somebody who likes data, I think we've got to keep the nuance. We've got to keep the data.
Mate. And it's only going to be an increasing value when I am lucky enough to, and we'll stop blowing smoke up each other's ass in a minute, but like when I am able to speak with people such as yourself, because I have a tremendous hunger and desire, almost a relentless desire to have that knowledge and this sort of sensational idea that I want to keep learning and want to keep growing. But it's only through conversations with people like yourself, some of the great subject matter experts around the world in fire and emergency services. There's so many people, doctors, NHS, police, I just want to learn so much more about. And I know I'm not the only person, but I'm lucky enough or stupid enough to be able to just sit there and look like a fool half the time as people bedazzle me with all of their information. But I did want to, before we get started, actually just give some props to our good friend Core. Obviously, I know you've done a colossal amount of work together. Just give us a whistle-stop tour of how the two of you first sort of met and the little adventure that you guys went on. It's a massive pleasure to welcome our new partner to the podcast, Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, I've personally worn Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades, working operationally in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services throughout their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceed global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. It's a really exciting and humbling moment to be welcoming Gore-Tex to the family. And the best way for you to support the podcast is to go over and find out a little bit more about all of the partners that help bring this podcast to you. So expect a lot of things coming from us in the future as we work together as a partnership to help inform, educate, and protect professionals in the fire and emergency services. Gore-Tex, going further together. Now back to the show.
Yeah, likewise, man. Props to Core. Thanks to Core for introducing us. And I think, I met Core whilst he, in his software, Fire Service Rota, is that which Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service uses. I kind of met him and reached out to him prior to the work I did with Shropshire. When I'd really started doing the research initially at Keele University, and I used Fire Service Rota as the app-based availability system in Shropshire as an on-call firefighter. And I reached out to Core based on some data, really, based on some like techie, geeky stuff. And him and Ruben, the co-founder, the AI expert, props to Ruben too. They're both really effectively dead smart, but cool guys, man.
Yeah.
And immediately, you only meet somebody and be like, we have just done, and you just chime, that you've got the same sort of philosophies and outlook without being too confirmation biased and in our own little echo chambers, ultimately Core's in Holland and Ruben's in Mexico. So, we're, our echo chambers are at least geographically very disparate.
Yeah.
And he quite clearly, even though he'd not been an on-call firefighter, just got it. It was like, oh man, you get it. And it's built in their sort of marketing mantra, flexibility is their first line, flexibility. And as we're going to talk about now and in the future, no doubt, it's almost the buzzword. It's the word that, everybody needs it, wants it, but needs software like Core's to create it. And so I've, over the time and in the research project with Shropshire, I've been working with Core and all the time, just kind of like, collaborating, how I see the context and understand the subject matter through the research certainly complements what he can do with the data and the technology. And likewise, really, we're masterminds, if you like. We're trying to work together and just keep talking about this stuff and coming up with some solutions for the on-call in particular. And yeah, he's a top guy.
So cycle us back for a second, because I know you've had a breadth of different careers and interests. Like, what's your kind of background and what brought you firstly to the fire and rescue services, and then almost trying to go beyond your professional obligation to have a sincere interest in trying to, help solve some of the big challenges that we're trying to wrestle with at the minute?
Okay, right. Good question. Let's get so I am a little bit about me, I suppose. I'm a father of two, most importantly, with a little newborn at the minute. So I'm very, lacking in sleep. And so as a result, apologies in advance if you got edits under this out or whatever, because I'm maybe not as fluid as I normally would be. But yeah, I'm a very otherwise fulfilled father of two, and an on-call firefighter and a professional researcher.
What does that mean? How do you become a professional researcher? No, a father, I get it. I read a book, a pop-up book I had once that showed me everything I pretty much needed to know about it. But
me too, I read that one.
Professional researcher, because I would like to think of myself as more of a recreational weekend researcher. But I don't. I've found it difficult at times to understand what quantifies reliable data. So give me a bit of background about being a professional researcher.
So the difference is you use Google and I use Google Scholar.
Oh my
There you go.
I have tried at times to differentiate between, or try to go deep into some of the Scholar stuff, but that's a workload in itself, isn't it? Because you have to know how to read some of that stuff.
And you got to know how to find it, because it just sends, like Google does, it just sends you down a rabbit hole and confirms everything you want to see. And so you've got to be very objective when you use any search tool, really. Okay. But to answer your question more seriously, the research element just comes off the back of years and years of study initially, just doing like lots of people do, did all the usual, your GCSEs, your A-levels, your undergraduate degree, masters, went to Keele, did a PhD.
Masters what? Masters as a researcher, sorry?
Masters in research in English, actually. So kind of by profession, if you like, I'm a philosopher. So my doctorate at Keele was in philosophy. Whereas but then when I was employed at Keele, because my last contract with Keele was as a Post-Doctoral Research Fellow under the Faculty of Natural Sciences. So because my research, despite it not being about the fire service up until the last 3 years, it lent itself really well, those skills that I acquired, to serve in the fire and rescue service. But the reason why sorry, go on.
What are some of the I don't want to jump past that, because that has been a massive part of your life, and it would just interest me and help like informally mentor me perhaps in like when I'm trying to look into things myself. What are some of it's probably even not hard to articulate, some of the low-hanging fruit that differentiates a researcher's mindset from someone who's just, out there fishing in the dark?
So I don't know whether it starts out with a certain capacity or propensity for being a researcher or looking at the world in a certain way, but your education guides you to, as a researcher, I see the world removed from a context. So removed from looking at the evidence, looking at what other people have researched and wrote, and looking at data in a way that helps me to understand a particular situation or a particular problem.
Doesn't make it any easier. I always say information and knowledge has never been so accessible as it is now, but it's not our resources, it's our resourcefulness that we struggle with, because it used to be a lack of resources, but now you can access the entire world through that magical little black magic box in your hand. But it's our resourcefulness, it's our cognitive capacity for patience versus instant gratification that I think we, or I certainly, not to speak for on behalf of anybody else, eternally struggle with. Because I've tried, even when I just read some of these big documents and the briefs and getting into some of the research for our episode, I've found it hard, just in total honesty with you, because I feel like I stumble across stuff so much where I don't have a wider context for it. So I don't know where it lives. I don't know where to put it in my mind. And makes me feel a bit stupid, I suppose.
Yeah, it does me sometimes. Some of the stuff that I read, for sure. It's so dense, and it's invariably written by people and that segues into what we're going to talk about, I think, really, that are sometimes removed from the context. So as researchers, we often get really heavy into the detail, and we approach problems with certain frameworks and certain ways of viewing the world and certain methodologies, which are very academic and can be very objective, using a lot of evidence and hugely valuable, especially in a world we talked about before that's less and less about nuance and about granularity. Social media, mass media is all about a few seconds, sound bites, a few characters. I was watching a a movie with my daughter the other day, and I couldn't believe how quickly the camera snapped from one shot to another, and how quickly each section was split up into tiny sections of attention. And that's engendering attention that doesn't lend itself well to sitting there for 3 hours, diving deep into a dense document all about something you may very well be interested about, but you also know there'll be somebody on YouTube who can tell you about it in 5 minutes flat, and then you think you understand it. And that's not a problem like for me to solve. Ultimately, that's the way the world's gone, and there's a lot of benefits to modern media and social media. But from my perspective, looking at the on-call fire service and using these research skills to start to delve into the perennial problem of on-call availability, which we're going to get to.
No, because echoing that binary thought, echoing that aspect of binary thought there, it's a little bit, when we put it into the context of what we're speaking about today, it's actually very hard to look at things in isolation. Like when people say, for an on-call perspective example, the problem is the technology, okay, or the problem is the pay, or the problem is this. You can't deal with those types of complexities in such binary or isolation style thinking, can you? It's not similar to like when we say, you're watching a film, that character is this. Well, no, they've got a whole life of noise behind them, which is contributing to their behavior, their biases, the characteristics, the decisions they're making. But we haven't got time for all that. So I'm just going to say they're racist or they're or they're whatever. And you're like, okay, well, let's just label that, because then I can place it somewhere in my mind. And similar to what I was just alluding to a minute ago, like sometimes I certainly struggle and generally really struggle. That's why I think we have so many labels in society as well. Before we go down this rabbit hole, it's like we like to know where things live, so we place them somewhere. Whereas I imagine for a large period of time or a large body of your work, you have to really sort of hold yourself back from allowing yourself to become lost in those biases, engaging in your own subconscious biases, sitting around people who are interested in your work like me, but then I will attempt to unknowingly influence your path of thought.
Yeah.
It must have been very difficult.
Well, yeah, it's one of life's paradoxes, isn't it? That none of us want to be put in a box. We're all snowflakes, and we're all like, we've all got these multifaceted personalities and characters and interesting lives, and yet all we ever do with everybody else is put them straight in a box. So it's just we have to grapple with that. In terms of, I suppose, the outlook that I have as a researcher and a person, I'm very positive. I'm very, I think, reflective of working in the fire service. Lots of us are practical firemanship through to, that positive approach that we all have when we're at an incident. I very much like to find problems and then to start to unpick them. So when I first joined the fire service in Cornwall, 11 years ago, when I heard about this perennial problem from, at the time, Sir Ken Knight, saying that this intractable issue of on-call availability, and it's all about recruitment and retention. It's all about recruitment and retention. That piqued my interest immediately as an academic, somebody who thought, there's a problem, and I can see it because I just turned out yesterday and the truck didn't go out the door. Yeah. And why was that? Was that just because we haven't got enough on-call firefighters? Actually, it wasn't on this occasion. We didn't have a driver. Oh, okay. I'll just put that away in the back of my brain somewhere. Right, okay. Then when I'm later away from that scenario and I'm having a little look around to see what research is, you see that the Fire and Rescue Service Association asked 4,000 on-call firefighters, what's the primary reason why your appliance doesn't go out the door? It's because of a lack of an IC or an emergency response driver. So it's not just about recruitment. Sometimes it's not about the total number of on-call firefighters. It's about their skills. So I'm like, right, let's add skills to recruitment and retention. And so I sort of saw in Cornwall to begin with this challenge of on-call availability. And then when I went to Devon and Somerset, I saw this challenge of on-call availability. Then I went to Staffordshire and I thought, there's a challenge here with on-call. This seems to be a theme. And I like themes as a researcher. I like thematic frameworks. Let's put everything into a big box. And then I got to Shropshire. Why haven't these got a problem with on-call availability? What's the 99? What's going on here? This is weird. So what I identified throughout all the services was that we're all doing the same thing, but all doing it differently. And we always know that, like, operationally. So every service I've been in does a different door entry.
Yeah.
Every service I've been in, one says stand up on the stairs, one says go down on the stairs.
Yeah,
and we've all got different fire kit, we all got different cutters, and we've all got different things. Very, very similar, but we're also very disparate organisationally, not just operationally. And most of the research goes into the operational elements, but the organisation, we're not always cognizant of best practice, of what other services are doing. So when I talk to some of these services, do you know this is happening here, and that they're doing that there? One service uses Garton for availability, one uses Fire Service Rota, and one uses, infographics, Firewatch.
Yeah.
And by the way, other availability software is available.
Oh yeah. All
that. Ultimately, there's common denominators of success. So instead of going around the country in these fire services, and then with my research hat latterly thinking, there's a lot of problems, I thought, no, there's a lot of solutions. There's actually services that are doing it really well. I've got good fire engine availability, but they're facing the same challenges, and they're often, you can't invoke the excuse which is invoked sometimes, which is we're different. We've got a predominantly town on-call stations. We've got predominantly rural. You can exclude the Mets.
Where you've got those variations. You've also, I think of it like a series of blankets or something. Like they've all got holes in them. But actually, if you laid all of them on top of each other, you would have a complete thing. Do you know what I mean? But we don't do that. We don't do that knowledge share very well. Like you say, there's such a focus, and we have this in so many areas. I've spoken about it ad nauseum in like leadership and different aspects in cultures. Operation, we focus on the operation, all-time operation, because so economically, the massive costs are non-operational. That's where the big money is getting lost. The big investment is being wasted because we're wandering around in the dark. But we're romantically attracted to the operational stuff because that's where lives get saved. Okay, look, we're all here to save lives. We all agree. And who can value the cost of a life? Nobody. Well, actually, you can. And there is actually a cost to it.
And now you can now.
I think it's something
million, I think the NFCC.
Yeah, there you go. So the NFCC have got theirs, but like I used to work in factories and industry, and that was significantly lower in those. It was around 400,000 or something like that. But anyway, there is such thing as a cost of a life, but we get attracted to the operational side of it where, if we really, let's talk about diversity, having people like yourself, and I'm sure there's lots of other people who spoke to Christian the other day, if we had more academics having an interest, actually that's harsh, not having an interest, because I know they do have an interest. If they were given opportunities to collaborate more with NHS, police, fire service, then we would be inundated with a different diverse method of thinking, I think, because you just, and again, I know we're going to say this word ad nauseum, but it's like we're so deep into our own bias, you don't even realize it. I remember someone telling me once, and this was back when I was really, really terrible in like my linear thinking. It was like, Pete, the boundary of your bias mindset is so far that you can't even see it. It's a little bit like, do you remember the film Truman Show?
Truman Show.
Yeah. You remember the film The Truman Show? It's that. Yeah. The boundary of your own world bias is so far away that you've allowed it to grow to such an extent you don't even realize you're in it. You're living inside a cult where the boundary is, and it's like you need to have foreigners, in the loosest sense of the word, from outside of your community come into you and help you understand what you don't realize you're doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like culture short for cult. It's a bit like the Village, isn't it?
Yes, The Village. Great film.
What Christian was saying when I listened to the podcast with Christian, that was a great one, and Andrew Lynch prior to the EFE Awards, and they both sort of spoke about the same thing in a different way, which is what you're speaking to, really. So Andrew Lynch talked about the idea that we need best practice. We need to share best practice. But we're not particularly good at it.
Yeah.
Whereas Christian talked about the absence of a culture of collaboration between research and fire. Now, to be fair to the sector and the leaders within the sector, they're seeking to change that. So the white paper in March, that signalled the need for a College of Fire to ultimately start that collaboration. The National Fire Chiefs Council's academic chair of evaluation and research, Rowena Hill, she's the same. So she's basically at Nottingham Trent University, but she's working more and more with the fire service to deal with not just sort of operational issues, but expand research and the lens through which the fire service can see the world using research.
Are we a bit too snobbish?
The topics.
Do you think that? Are we a bit too like, because you have this when we have Green Book staff come into our sector sometimes, real, subject matter experts, real thought leaders in the area of like learning and development or, human resources or, policy writing or whatever it might be. And I have seen it, sorry to generalize, where people are like, what do they know about fire? And you're like, well, they don't fucking need to. You need to get over yourself a little bit there, mate. We're blocking that knowledge because I don't know. I mean, it's part of what makes it so cool, which is unfortunate. But we're in our family, we're in our gang. Do you know what I mean? We all do this, and everyone knows what it's like to be on the front line. Well, yeah, they do, but you've spent so much time on the front line. You've not developed these other skill sets, so you're never going to be able to know that.
And I think what's often happened is, especially above. So like watch managers, station manager and above, the leaders within the organisations, they're given the projects on top of being a flexi officer, on top of having to do X amount of operational work. They say, oh, you got to do this on-call project and you've got to do this salary project. And they haven't got capacity to do it well. And that's really where I see in the last few years, researchers like me have come into the sector and hopefully more are coming into the sector to support those leaders to go, I can take that burden. I can do the research, the data, the project. But what that does lack is sometimes when it comes to the on-call, I think you really do need to know the context because, I'll cite some research to back up that assertion really. Weston Murphy in 2016 at Nottingham Trent University did a great case study piece of research of 4 fire and rescue services. And they basically, one of the main conclusions was that at the time, RDS staff, retained duty system staff, need retained duty system managers. They need people who are able to fully understand, empathize with, and have the insights of what it takes to be a retained firefighter at the time, now and what we call an on-call firefighter. And that without that, everything else that follows just gets really challenging because of that capacity. They haven't got the capacity to have that open mind, to be empathetic, to be as supportive as they might need to. And their conclusion with that research was we really need to make sure every service, good practice is to have a predominance of on-call experienced managers managing the on-call. And that's not just each watch manager at the station. They're obviously on-call experienced, but your leaders. And so
I agree. Doesn't that make it, let's just pause there because I know I want you to carry on, but does that, I just want to throw in the lens of equality, that old word. It's, that alienates a certain amount of people that can never become whatever area manager, group manager, station manager of an on-call sector because they've never had that area of experience. So I can see why that would be less achievable in service. I agree with you. So like in my capacity now in our training and development department, I've been asked to lead all of the new recruits courses for our on-call and our whole time as well. Well, the whole time is the main sector. And then they said, Pete, would you mind taking on and leading all the on-call as well?
Okay.
And the evidence they gave, I'm sure they're just blowing smoke up my ass, but it was like, you've done 10 years on call, so you have that wealth of knowledge there. You've done it as a firefighter, driver, manager. You've got that, and you'll have more authenticity and stuff like that. And obviously I agree because they're giving you goddamn compliments, but it's like, but it doesn't make, I suppose, it can make you more relatable. It does unfortunately alienate people that have never been part of that. Hey folks, just wanted to jump in with a quick piece around firefighter health and wellbeing. Whether you are trying to join the fire service and pass them tricky fitness tests, if you are currently serving, or if you are coming up to that next chapter of your life, retiring from the emergency services, We get so many different questions around it. So in partnership with Fitness for the Frontline, we have come up with a series of guidance and programs specifically designed to reflect the physical elements of the role of a firefighter. So whether it's carrying an LPP across an overgrown field, lifting a ladder above your head under running it, or wrestling with cutting gear for 30 plus minutes at some kind of complicated RTC, our bodies are required to lift, push, and carry objects in very specific circumstances. That is effectively what Fitness on the Frontline focuses on, as well as the longer term aspects of overall health and wellness for our firefighters. Now, we are definitely not about to be smashing out world records or getting that beach body ready in 6 weeks rubbish. The systems and programs that we put in place are adjusted for people's current fitness levels, and they're not a prescriptive weight or a one-size-fits-all BS. It is very likely for myself personally that I'm still going to be a firefighter when I'm 60 plus, so longevity in the role is really important to me, and I know it is for so many people out there. It all starts with no obligation, 7 days worth of the programming, absolutely free. So whether you're joining, serving, or looking at the next chapter in your life, Fitness for the Frontline is designed by firefighters for firefighters. Now back to the show.
Yeah, from an equal opportunity perspective, from an organisational perspective,
yes,
I understand that, everybody needs to be given that opportunity. I think what some services have done, which is clever, is they bifurcate the senior managers. So they say, right, we'll have a whole strand of, because there's always more than one station manager, more than one group manager, and then we effectively allow the people with the most on-call experience to be the ones that are managing their on-call. That's one way to do it. So you are providing more opportunity. And there's a lot said at a national level at the moment about the opportunities for using the on-call workforce. Many of the papers, many of the preceding reviews, HMI repeatedly suggest that actually there should be more opportunities to use the skill base, to use the knowledge and experience from within the on-call, within the senior managers. That's a repeated call that you hear. And so there's opportunity.
Because some of these people, to interrupt you again, some of these people run multi-million-pound businesses. I know a number of on-call firefighters who are tremendously successful in their field of expertise, and it just does not get... it doesn't get acknowledged, which is okay because some of them don't need acknowledgement, but more worryingly, it doesn't get utilised. No. You've got subject matter experts, we've got doctors, we've got engineers, we've got research, and you're like, we don't use them. We don't use them because it's like we have this thing about, it's not a qualification that we recognise or whatever, and you're like, fucking behave yourself. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, but please carry on.
Yeah, I think it's just going all the way back really to that context, which we talked about, is that having that context of the on-call is a very particular culture, and we're going to talk about this in the future, and it's fed by the local culture, and each station has its culture. And as Mark Hardiman rightly said in the Home Affairs Committee in March, there are multiple cultures that exist within the fire and rescue service, and that makes leadership and management challenging. That's like a verbatim quote, pretty much.
Makes it an art form.
It really does.
Leadership is an art form. It's not, and that's where we come away again from that. People with a binary thought. It is this and that. No, it's not. It's an art form. It's like communication. You know as well as I. Like, you think of all if we just started to list the cultures that exist in you've got Green Book, Grey Book, you've got on call, you've got whole time, you've got local community culture, you've got a local fire station culture, you've got a watch culture, you've got a watch culture that might be alongside an on-call watch and that's changing over with other watchers. You've got a local fire service, a regional fire service, and a national fire service. And then so when you start to, it makes you dizzy when you start and the way here's something I would like to just touch on in terms of a research perspective, which speaks to this really, which is, and to give you an idea of where I come at it as a researcher. One of the things that was very clear to me in like the 132 papers that I read was the idea that culture was talked about all the time, but very rarely defined. It's nearly always, and at the moment, culture is a big word. It's a buzzword sometimes, isn't it? And people say about focus on culture and all that sort of stuff. It's like, it's happening. I always think like, in not making a decision, you're already making a decision, because when people say, we need to start focusing on culture, you were already doing it. And whether you thought you were focusing on it or not, and I talk about this all the time, it's like right part of the culture. Yeah. So it's like every interaction I have with people, I always look at it like a scale. I'm like, you're adding weight to one side of the scale all of the time. And that is it with culture. There is no decision, or there's no incident, there's no managerial pivot that lives outside of that culture, and we have to acknowledge those things. We even have to acknowledge the stuff that's happening nationally. We can't go, oh well, that's happening somewhere else, so we're not going to talk about that. Well, it's already in the room. So sorry.
We also have to recognise, that so for me, when I've been researching all this work I've been doing, I started and was very careful to start with the definition of it, really, because culture is invariably conflated with leadership and management. It involves EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, but they're not culture.
No.
Culture are the definition given by DeLisi in 2020 of fire service culture was that it's the ideas and the values that reflect the practices and behaviors of a particular group. So it's the ideas and values that are reflected in the practices and behaviors of a particular group. Now, that particular group is myriad in the fire and rescue service. So there's all these ideas. You've got ideas, I've got ideas, you've got values, I've got values. Your whole time you're on call, you might do it for money, you might do it for community, you might do it for challenge, you might do it for excitement, you might value flexibility. You might not. You might want rigidity and semi-disciplined and be, a product of a very, very rigid regime. Like these are so actually when we.
But also just the way you think. Some people really struggle with that lack of discipline. And when I say discipline, I just mean like I used to work in a system of they called it ROWE, results only work environment. And it was just like, this is your workload, get it done. Whereas some people are like, what time do I need to start work and where do I need to sit? And well, no, that's my desk, isn't it? Or this, or who is my line manager, or what's actually my remit, or which part of this incident ground do I need to tidy up? And you're just like, just help be a good member of the team. What the fuck does that mean? That is where we start to fork off in those diverse values, which come from people's nurture.
Yeah. And come from, and because I've been coming at all this research work through the prism of the on-call and looking at focused on the on-call, it's the local community culture that's at the core of every single on-call station. Yeah. And when you get that right, you get a culture that is at the on-call's core that's conducive to goodwill and conducive to flexibility and crews working well together in the absence of salaries, in the absence of a lot of money, because there's not a lot of money in the world anywhere anyway, but most on-call firefighters aren't doing it for that. And the research suggests they're certainly not doing that from a recruitment perspective. Retention, it might help, but not recruitment.
What was pause there for a second. Was there a study once, because I'm just having it in my mind and I might have to edit this bit out, but I'm like, they did a study and it may not have been related to on-call, but I know it was related to some similar work stream style, working style, where people were doing certain things for free, and then they introduced the opportunity for people to be paid for those things, and immediately output or whatever it was went down. Even though nobody did any more hours, it was just the fact that they got paid for doing it. They use certain cultural indicators around passion and goodwill and stuff like this, and it immediately went down. I don't know if that's just something that's come to my head out of the ether, and I don't know what study it was, but have you seen, because people were still astonished at the fact that certain parts of the world, there are enormous parts that they still term them as volunteer firefighters. So they're not retained and they're not on call. They are volunteer. They do it for free.
Yeah. Well, it's I'd like to see that study. I'm not sure whether that was a fire service study, but I'd be interested in it because I can see how it would happen effectively.
A lot of places in Australia, Germany, stuff like that, they still have a lot of volunteer firefighters.
Oh man, for volunteer firefighter, well, the research. So the research for the Brandweer Academy, which is like the Dutch for the Fire Academy, they do some great research, and they did with Elbers in 2019, a big one in recruitment and retention. And when you looked at all of that data, there was 17 fire and rescue services they looked at, and those that really were most successful at recruiting and retaining were those services where they didn't pay at all. They effectively had a local community culture or a local culture that so highly valued the fire and rescue service, they never had a problem recruiting. They were just continually oversubscribed. Now, I'm not personally advocating that model in the UK, but I know that, and what I've wrote a lot about in the research is the idea that insofar as management's concerned, insofar as culture's concerned, it would probably behoove us to consider the workforce more tantamount to volunteers, because then you get that loose rein approach, you get that flexible approach. And the fact that they are paid means that somehow they're more beholden to behave in a certain way and do rigid hours, and actually doesn't necessarily benefit a lot of stations and a lot of services, really.
Dude, I'm loving this. I'm absolutely loving it. Sorry, it's like I feel like, because what I'm really guilty of sometimes is like I feel like I'm wandering through fog with my ideas, and what I feel like you're doing, you're offering handles, you're offering a banister every time I'm wandering through the fog, because you're actually you've got these references, and I keep trying to write them down as you say them, but like you've actually got these references that solidify some of the stuff that we know viscerally is present in the industry. But you're right, and this is what I'm trying to say, and I know we'll carry on now, but it's like, from a research perspective, this hard work has been done, and morons like me viscerally have either read something or seen something or heard someone speak at some point in time, but it just gets lost in the ether. All that research was done in silo. But you've got those references. You've actually done the work. You must have some colossal hard drives and lists of links where this work has been done. Sorry, please carry on.
Well, research does often exist in a silo and often creates little impact. You can get published. We get published as academics, and then often nobody's ever reads your thesis. Nobody ever reads what you've written, really.
Stop using so many big words, then.
More than I know. Well, I'm gonna use some even bigger ones in a minute. Just hang on while I explain the thematic framework, Pete.
Please do.
That'll lose all your listeners. So, I think there's often so much research, and it's not always contextually driven, as we talked about. And that was where I came at the perennial problem of on-call availability, really. I saw that working throughout the fire and rescue services, there were these common denominators of success. But as I talked about in Cornwall, there was often a way more than just about recruitment or total numbers of firefighters. There's so much more at play. So when I was reading everything I was reading, and which is, first, I wanted to get as much information as I possibly could. And what I had to do is, and this speaks to what we just talked about, really, is expand the search for information about the on-call beyond the definition of on-call and retained. Because, as you said, in other countries, in Australia, in the US, in Europe, they have different terminology. So a study by Lantz and Runnefors in 2020 in Sweden studied that. They studied what different terms are being used, and is the job very different. What they found was that actually they looked at 27 fire and rescue services internationally, and they found that these different terms, part-time, on-call, retain, volunteer, non-career, they actually reflect almost the same job.
Yeah.
So even in America, even in Australia, when they call them volunteers, they're invariably paid like we're paying retained firefighters, or I'm being paid as an on-call firefighter. They're getting some sort of retainer and some form of turnout fee. And even in countries where they're not getting formal payment, they might be getting medical cover. They might get free insurance, which for some
I think that's
huge.
something, we don't do that. And I feel like that's a way that government could support. I'm probably jumping ahead 27 steps here, which is I'm guilty of at times, and please rein me back. But like,
Me too, Pete. Me too.
I feel like and I don't know what research has been done into it, or if this is even attempted in certain services. Anyone hears it and they know about it, or if you've got it in your research, please bring it up. But it's like, that is ways that potentially government could subsidize and or incentivize. But again, that's assuming that finance is the big problem. We just talk about it because the cost of living is challenging for people these days, but it's not the be all and end all. Financial is not the only incentive for people. But I digress. But I feel like that's a way that, whether it's tax benefits, whether it's whatever, we can incentivize and support, as whilst we try and say and clap in the street for people. It's like, well, how can we actually help that person's quality of life a bit more? But sorry,
spot on. Yeah, you're spot on, Pete. Absolutely. And lots of the reviews, from Bain in 2002 to Ken Knight in 2013 to more recently Adrian Thomas in 2015, they all suggest that we should look at nationally a means by which effectively you can just give national insurance and tax dispensation to on-call firefighters, and that would in one fell swoop reduce the budgetary requirements to pay that service and pay those firefighters. And actually it'd be a win-win. And private organizations, FTSE 100 companies and so on, often do have clever little strategies like that, really. And that's repeatedly suggested to be looked at. But in order for the research that I did to be expansive and to really try to get to grips with, one, the problem, and two, what evidences are out there, what researches are out there totally to support solutions to recruitment, retention, and lots of the other factors, meant that I expanded my search. So I looked at non-career firefighters. I looked at studies of volunteer firefighters in the US and Australia and Finland. I looked at a huge amount of case study information. I read, I believe it or not, I think I'm the only person that's probably read every single HMI inspection report for every single service at least once.
They're intense,
man.
aren't they?
Well,
I want to
F
do
does
more
help with
work
that.
into that,
Yeah.
and I've tried to read a few, and I've been like, oh, because it's such a hot topic, and I want to speak to those people and those services that have got exemplary reviews and try and understand a little bit about how and why and all that sort of jazz. But yeah, that some of them documents are hard going.
They're dense, man. But I had to do it. It's due diligence. We talked about this before we came on air. It's due diligence, man. Like, that's my academic skill set. That's what I've been taught for the last 9 years. Is, man, make sure you do your diligence.
Make sure you know your shit.
Make sure
don't just start talking about it.
Make sure you reference. Yeah, mate. If you're putting your head above the parapet, then make sure that, like, you know, you've got a very good helmet on. Like, ultimately, I did that. I did with this research. I believe I covered everything there is to cover. I read all the NFCC guidance. So whenever any of the suggestions and the framework I came up with were all predicated on all that evidence. So what ultimately it led me to, Pete, was that about 2 years ago, I realized that there were about 9 significant factors that mediate the on-call fire engine availability. And I put them into like 3 themes. So I did 3. I looked at, first and foremost, the 3 R's. That's the ones everybody talks about, which is recruitment, retention, resignation. And then I looked at data. How can we look at the data on those things and look at the research on those things to work out what's actually the core issues and what solutions there might be? Then I looked at the 3 S's, because it was quite clear that also, and this speaks to CORE's fire service rota and the availability software, you've got salary, skills, and strategic workforce planning. They kind of align, and it's dead important for keeping fire engines available. Dead important, really. And then you've got 3 with the big C in it. You've got communication, crewing, and culture. Now, all of those in totality, and they're all very, imagine like Venn diagrams with the 3 R's, 3 S's, 3 C's, and they're all interconnected, and there's little bits of it. And yeah, I've done that. I'm the boring guy that's drawn the pictures, drawn the Venn diagram.
They look bloody good though.
Like, and they're and you start to work out where they interact, and sort of like, you know, again, look at what the research suggests in each one of those areas you can do, what best practices in different services in the UK and elsewhere to address those issues. And then there was 4 other, which thankfully this last 4 combined to make a nice little fire service acronym, Pete, because we all love an acronym in the fire service, don't we? We're all love a mnemonic from Jessup, methane, God knows what. We've all got one, or many, and it's TICKed, right? So it's training, industrial relations, collaboration, and data. Because whatever you come up with, you've got to be able to kind of train it invariably, whether it's recruitment, retention, it all involves training. Industrial relations is key. Like, you're not going to drive change, you're not going to create impact unless you've got a good industrial relations climate.
It's a fucking swamp, though. That's a quagmire.
But you've got to mention it.
And there's lots of great people with best of intentions, but they do say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, don't they? I just feel like some of that stuff, but I know we've got to engage in it. That is part of the vehicle. It just feels like the slowest wheel on the car. Sometimes.
Be inclusive.
And I acknowledge and appreciate and very, very appreciative of the hard work that a lot of those people do. But again, some of them just bog down in their own pride sometimes. It stops us moving towards the directions that collectively we feel we should. And I'm sure half of it is from both sides. Anyway, I digressed, but please carry on.
So, I'll just go about that. Effectively, that thematic framework in academic terms allowed me then, and allows anybody now really, to go and say, right, these are the significant factors. It's about more than recruitment and retention. So let's look at all your data and what you're doing currently, and let's see if they align to best practice for each one of these significant factors. And let's see how the data helps us to create and innovate solutions and do things meaningfully in what the FRSA said years ago, and what has been around in business for years, a smart approach, that always adopting that smart approach. And I'm sure later on we'll get to some of the innovations that have come out of that, really. Probably a really good one, to give an example for listeners, is, I think I briefly talked about it before, is skills.
Yes.
salary. So if you look at the 3S's, skills, strategic workforce planning, and salary, you can get software that allows you to look at all of those things in unison. And like Fire Service Rota, and when you look at the research to begin with, you see that when you look at skills, or you go into a particular service and you say, right, let's look at every single one of your on-call stations. Let's look at your availability. Let's then map that to your skills. How many emergency response drivers you've got, how many incident commanders you've got, and how many contracts they're on, how many hours they're covering. All of a sudden, you get huge correlations, and it's not causation. Cause and effect is different to correlation. But ultimately, just looking at that in that way allows you to go, okay, right, now we can see where the problem is. So at one particular station, you might need to have more incident commanders, and at one station, you might need more drivers. Now,
drivers is a massive one, mate, and I know I'm going to keep doing, and you're going to have to keep pulling me back from solution mindset, because that's where. And when I was doing all this stuff in a previous employment around problem solving and Kaizen and Six Sigma, and creating fishbones and all that sort of stuff, you had to stop yourself constantly getting into solution mindset. But driving has been one I've been speaking to people about it for 2 decades. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think at some point we decided subconsciously to take it. I mean, it's out of your required standards. Oh, I'm having a mind blank. One of your
role map.
One of your role map. Yeah, sorry, thank you. We used to have to do it as a competency, as one of our.
It still is, Pete. Yeah,
it's still but it's not.
It still is a role map.
Yeah, but you don't have to do it.
No, you don't have to.
You don't have to do it to get competency. This is what I'm saying. It's in the role map, but it's been dropped as a requirement. And in places like London and stuff, and I'm sure hopefully people will get in contact, they used to, and maybe they still do, I don't think they do now, but they used to pay the drivers a little bit more, because it is an additional skill set, it's an additional responsibility. Yeah. It's certainly very required, but like when you act up as an incident commander, you get an enhancement, but there's no real acknowledgement at all for drivers. And then I felt like we've painted ourselves into these corners. We romantically said, "Oh, surely everyone wants to drive a fire engine. It's a dream when you're a kid, And I did. I always drive. So you didn't have to encourage me. You didn't have to motivate or persuade me to get my driver ticket. I wanted to do it. But now, I mean, now in society in general, there's so many people in their 30s that haven't even got a driving license.
Yes,
let alone. They're like,
there's a shortage of LGV drivers, and
I don't want to drive a fire engine. I'm not really interested. I'll sit in the back. I'll do my thing. And now we're like, we got any fucking drivers?
We need you to drive.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And again, but then, like you rightly identified, you bring in that other essential criteria of industrial relations, because then if you want to change that, who's gonna pay for what? How do we do it? You can't make people do it. You can't just change a contract.
Well, Pete, sorry to intercede, but I have looked at that. Yeah, and actually, it's interesting to say about London, because effectively all the previous reviews and lots of researchers said, yeah, you need to pay drivers more. Let's just simplify it. You need to pay drivers more. But within the grey book terms and conditions, the National Joint Council, effectively that industrial relations backdrop we're talking about, there's the ARAs. So there's that additional responsibility allowance, which does afford capacity to pay somebody for not only different skills, but additional responsibilities. Now, driving is an additional responsibility. You're taking up your own head, your own license. So there is provisions to do it. And the smart services do. The challenge with driving is often that there's not enough driving instructors. As you say, there's not enough LGV drivers.
No, I agree.
You've got to get them through the mill. And the Fire Standards Board have recently changed the criteria so that now everybody is having to do 2 weeks driving. Now, for an on-call firefighter, 2 weeks blue light driving. Now, for an on-call firefighter, it's already challenging enough getting a week away from the family or a week away from work.
I'm going to have to take some more of my own personal leave to attend a fire service course.
That's a real challenge for the on-call. Now, I understand why the Fire Standards Board suggest it, for consistency, for compliance, for competency, for ensuring the safety of the public, 100%.
Yep.
In terms of the ramifications for it on the on-call, I'm not sure that they were fully cognizant of that. And that's what talks about, we're talking about context and knowledge of that arm of the workforce, which increasingly, as we haven't even touched on yet, Pete, the data shows on-call firefighters are, I just looked at the data actually, just to digress, I just looked again at the data because the 2022 Office for National Statistics data has come out in relation to the fire service workforce, from fire stations to numbers of fire engines to numbers of personnel. And everything that I'd written in the preceding year and year before that was based on older data. So the new data is similar, but a little bit of a change, really. And so, for your listeners,
please do.
There's 1,390 fire stations now in the UK.
1,390, 1,395 stations.
1,390, yeah.
In the UK, not in England.
Sorry, in England.
In England,
yeah,
okay.
Thank you for the correction. Yeah, spot on. That is dead easy.
No, mate, only because the more I learn about it,
like
we were speaking about Ireland and that, and the differentiations between how many stations there are in Ireland versus Northern Ireland, and that's teaching me to make sure I get granular, because I can very easily trip myself up. So, okay, sorry, carry on.
We do, don't we? Oh, man, me too. I just made the mistake. Pete, for sure. There's 736 of them are on call. 231 now are mixed. If you take out the metro,
what's that? 65%, something like that. That's massive, isn't it?
Hey, come on, that's a quick brain, Pete. That's a good.
It's about there. It's probably not right.
Spot on. No, exactly 65%.
Is it really?
That's
genuine. I have not got that document in front of me. That was blind.
No,
I'm not going to claim that one.
You're just a genius. That's
I probably read it somewhere. It just fell out the ether in my head. Go on.
No. Pete, you've now instilled me with the confidence that if I ever have to wear with you and we're there and we're doing our gun calculation and we're doing our turnaround.
Oh, you know what? Just let's digress for a second. There's so many stuff there where it's like, and this is, I forget what book I read it in, but they actually used a firefighter study whereby, and that's when we talk about gut, we talk about gut instinct. I'm sorry, I'll get off this digress for a second in a minute, but it was like, your gut instinct is often because your mind moves so much quicker than your cognitive thought, and it just thrashes through the Rolodex really, really fast, doesn't it? It finds a million data points and goes, this is the right decision. You don't know why, you can't understand it, you call it your gut, you say, oh, it's my tummy, you give it some sort of physical manifestation, some place where it needs to live, and you go, I feel like it's that, and then it was right, and you go, and people go, oh God, what's that? And you go, well, you're too stupid for your own mind, because it's moving that fast, because it's in that sort of fight or flight mode. It's like, I haven't got time to explain it to you, but from all these data points, it says this, and you just go with it.
Yeah, you've done the calculation already. And going back to talking to you before, when we've talked about this before, that speaks to that Aboriginal culture that recognizes that the third brain is that intellect, is the brain that we would locate in our skull, where actually you've got the gut and the heart, and now modern science is teaching us, shit, there's more and there's more cells in our heart, and I've got that telling us stuff. And you're right, your mind's already done that calculation, hasn't it? You just, if you're relaxed enough to let your body and listen to these other areas, then boom, out it comes, really, out the
take us back, 1,390.
So 1,390 fire stations, you worked out, effectively 65% of them are on-call fire stations. If you take out, there's 83% of fire stations are on-call or mixed if you take out the metropolitan services. So the data from the metropolitan services often skews it, but there's only 425 whole-time stations, and they're predominantly, there's only 189 whole-time stations outside of the metropolitan areas.
Really?
Yeah, man. It's
that's the thing, isn't it? Places like those big metropolitans, they really skew the data, don't they? Because you treat them as the same. I'm not getting into everyone's same and equal. I mean, we teach them as binary. Oh, well, I looked at this service and I looked at that service. Right, well, that one's a behemoth. And this one, you've got to take out that little bit of noise, haven't you? Because there's so many other different cultural, economical, geographical challenges there. Because I don't know what the percentages are, but like some of these big metropolitan services, a lot of the people don't live anywhere near there. So the culture aspect of it will largely be different as well, because the people aren't reflective of that culture necessarily because they don't even live there. But anyway, sorry.
Well, as we talked about, their ideas, their values, the definition of culture, when you say it's about the ideas, the values, the manifesting particular practices and behaviors of that particular group, which generally talks about the culture that we've been all privy to in LFB and the recent View document, that people are bringing in their ideas and values from all around the country.
And further afield.
So it's really complicated. It's not as straightforward. And I feel as a researcher that's what I can lend to that narrative, is that objectivity of saying we really do need to understand culture first and separate it from leadership and management, really, and separate it from EDI and say, well, what is it actually, what's happening, and recognise that they're disparate, that they're multiple, and that everybody is entitled to their own ideas and values. And as you said at the start, we're all just living them here and now, right in this very moment. And so when we start to judge them and we look back on the fact and where everything's hindsight 2020, it's dead easy. We're using our right brain. We're going, oh yeah, this was said for that reason. And in reality, in the moment, it was a very different context. It was a very different scenario. But yeah, when you look at the data and just really with the, I think my on-call insights with that context, you start to see, actually, the on-call landscape is such that on-call firefighters, I think, should be proud that they're covering such a huge area of the landmass of this country, and that I've been aware of in the last few years, we haven't celebrated, I think, enough the fact that they are increasingly the predominant means by which everybody is receiving the service from the fire and rescue service.
Yeah, I feel like they get given a disproportionate amount of input. Their opinions are not as valued, despite the fact they are the majority of the workforce.
Yeah. In 17 fire and rescue services across the country, out of the 45 and the 42 that have on-call, 17 of them have more on-call firefighters than whole-time firefighters.
Bang.
On every metric, so this is me research head on looking at the Office for National Statistic data. So there's loads more stuff we can dig into later, and loads more stuff that speaks in different ways about this dynamic, including the cultural work. But fundamentally, there is a huge number of firefighters who are on-call firefighters, and they certainly, I think, deserve more attention maybe, and deserve more research going their way, because as far as I know, I am almost standalone as a researcher that's come and said, I'm an on-call firefighter, I'm going to do on-call research, which is going to look
you're a weird hybrid though, and it's very lucky that you just seem to have landed in that sector with those skill sets. It's just a random lucky coincidence, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I didn't plan it. Definitely, life's what happens while you're busy making plans, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah.
And yeah, I absolutely didn't plan it. So when I was studying way back when, I wasn't even in the fire service, never in a million years did I think that this is what I would be doing. And I feel very blessed that I am, because there is it sounds a bit cheesy, but my vision, my strapline is to fix the RDS with RDS. And when I say fix the RDS with RDS, I will fix the retained duty system with research data solutions. It's not because it's broken in the sense that, the people within it, they're keeping it going. It's not in the sense that it's not, it's a model that's broke entirely. It's more that the problem that needs fixing is on-call availability.
Yeah.
It's the fire engine availability, really. And the research and data can provide solutions, and already has.
I feel like as life and society have changed, on-call members, or retained, or whatever it is people call them these days at their certain area, they have actually had to work disproportionately harder and exert disproportionate amount of passion, more than their predecessors would have had to, because they've had to work in a system that just hasn't evolved alongside society very well.
Yeah, it's set up in a very different way. And what's kept it going is to sort of invert and plagiarize Mark Hardeman. Is the extraordinary people making the extraordinary look ordinary operationally. I really sincerely believe the on-call workforce in particular, works the whole time as well, but in particular are ordinary people providing extraordinary commitment. For an ordinary person to provide 120 hours a week of commitment in the absence of any real meaningful remuneration is staggering. And one of the things we found in the research was one of the key things for retention is that people want to self-actualize. On-call firefighters sign up to get out there and do that job. When they're not doing that job, it's breeds despondency. It lowers morale. It means they're more likely to kick out of that 3 to 8 year volunteer cycle that happens within the on-call and happens in the volunteer sector more broadly, where
who was it saying recently, like you say, that they're just not getting the return on investment, the cost that it is to train people, and they only do, like you've just said, 5 to 8 years or even less in certain services, and it's not even becoming sustainable from an investment from an individual perspective.
No, that was one of the key findings in one of the services that I work with, really most recently, Shropshire, is that their tenure, the length of time they're keeping, not only did they have a legacy of high establishment levels, But ultimately, because they're only turning them over once every, on average, about 13 years, they're retaining them tremendously well. So not only are they retaining high
Staffordshire,
level,
that's who it was. When I was having a chat with the CFO, Rob from Staffordshire, he was saying it's just not that he didn't say they're not getting their money's worth. That's probably a horrible way to say it, but he said it better. You know, it was like there's the cost of investment in training their individuals, and they're just seeing the length of careers really shorten. But again, society-wise, because people move, people have different careers, their families, you know.
They do. Yeah. The data shows that dead clearly that one, that it's around about £30,000 a year for an on-call firefighter to get them to 3 years competent from development to okay. And so then there's a significant amount of data that shows that they turn over at 3 years. At 3 years, their expectations of the job were not met. They eventually they're not doing what they signed up to do. There's a variety of reasons. Fundamentally, it's about expectations. Really, now the job is different to that which they thought, or they just think.
But let's go there for a second as well, because this is something I've thought about doing more. Sorry to interrupt. Doing more within our service is trying to get people operational quicker. Because I think, again, another lens to put on this is that we've brought in so much from a good place, health and safety, risk assessed, blah, blah, blah. We've pushed people's ability in certain services, ability to contribute in an operational capacity. We've pushed it further down through things like apprenticeships, which have been great, but some have just pushed people further down. They can be in the job for like 12 or 18 months before they're taking part in an operational incident.
Yeah.
Because and again, it's even harder with on-call because of how they have to take all their personal leave, their modules and their courses before they become supernumerary safe to ride. They can be a long way, and they're like, I've done this for 8 months now. I'm not done anything yet. I can't ride the trucks. I can't, and they lose the passion. They hemorrhage it before they give it a chance to enjoy it. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, just to add another lens there.
Yeah, lots of services have done that. I've tried modular approaches, I've expedited training. Say effectively that you don't need to do your BA until later down the line, so you can ride, do RTCs.
Just get them out there, get them on the truck.
Lots have done it. Lots have tried that, and I think fundamentally from the retention perspective, the recruitment and retention perspective, the research definitely shows that recruitment is costly. It's uncertain of success. And so to hang your hat on recruitment at the moment is maybe not the prudent thing to do, really, fiscally or from a realistic perspective of bolstering your numbers, no matter what strategy you adopt. Whereas retention, you've already got those people and you can already work with them. And then dead crucially, they've already invariably got the skills. So you will have a driver, you will have an IC that keeps the pump on the run. And you're retaining kind of what you just spoke to a little bit, really, the experience. So experience, especially in whole time, I know that's really, really significant. The idea that more and more that experience hasn't been replaced because of redundancies and because of all manner of things. And you're losing those people who really have that crucial experience, and that's just been eroded. And so when you can hang on to within the on-call workforce, you'll retain staff for longer than those 3 to 8 years. You see huge increases in availability, and the services that do that and keep them longer than those average of 3 to 8 years.
Well, I always say, like, if you shrunk it down to just interpersonal relationships, I think about this with my wife, just to give us a flip lens. Let's just jump out for a second. Is like, I always say, if you treat it like you did in the beginning, there'll never be an end when it comes to personal relationships. Now, that may be a tremendous generalization, and personal relationships are very, very difficult. But like, if you treat your partner, significant other, man, woman, whatever it might be, and I always do this when I'm sending my missus like a message, or like I'm talking to her, I'm like, how would I speak to you if this was the first couple of months of our relationship? I'd be interested in you. I'd be intrigued. I'd be curious. I'd be flirtatious. I'd be all of these things. And I'm not pretending that I am all the time, because I'm far from perfect, definitely. But it's like, treat it like that. Invest in, let's put time aside together. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's go away together. If you continue to invest in your people, not to treat my wife like an investment, but it's like, courses, creating a better work environment for them, just personal development, linearly, not even just like promotions and progression and skill sets, but if you invest in the person's fulfillment in work and their work conditions and just how much of a trusted and involved member of the service or community that they feel, like you say, that then leads to the longevity and the colossal cost. Because again, if your personal relationship breaks down, I'm sure we all know somebody how costly that can be. And you think, when did I start taking this person for granted? And that's what we do.
And
that's what we do.
Granted, yeah, you're absolutely spot on that. And that recognition of that really, and that valuing that person enough that you're willing to try and keep.
Well, that's where I've seen
mindset.
Like certain services have started doing, and they're probably they're probably been doing it for years, but like they're recognizing local employers. There's a few schemes where I've seen like they will give an award or a badge or a certification to a local employer who allows their member of staff to provide on-call availability whilst they're employed, and it's a great badge of recognition for certain companies in the communities as well. And that's just a micro example, but you know what I mean? I've seen some of that.
Yeah, me too. And the services I've worked for and the services that I've got the research from, really. And yeah, some do it well and engage them, and all the big reviews repeatedly suggest that it's really important to engage the primary employer, because ultimately they're the ones giving their employee the dispensation to tip out in the day. Now, in rural areas, often the employer and the employee, that's blurred because they're maybe a farmer, or they employ themselves, they're self-employed. So, but where there is quite clear that there is a primary employer that is behind this person, then yeah, absolutely, they deserve that recognition. They need engaging more, if only just to see off the reality that they've got their economic constraints and they might be down the line anticipating not letting that person go. So it's about retention again. And I think all the stuff on retention, which we'll talk about, farther down the line, feeds into culture. And that's often what's been missing in the research that's been done that I was looking at. So often people were talking about recruitment, retention, the things we're talking about, without the on-call in mind and without culture being present. So it was often about what you just talked about, barriers to entry, let's say, for training, about the cost of recruitment, about pure numbers game, really, rather than saying so much of it is about just the local culture within that community and at that local fire station. That watch managers, I know we haven't really touched on that, but local watch managers at on-call stations, they are just some of the most phenomenal people who are intuitively strategic workforce planning. They're conduits for culture. They're conduits for communicating organizational and operational stuff all the time. They're on those phones and on that 24/7, man. They're doing so many hours. They are just completely fantastic people. And you might not as individuals, I obviously don't know all of them as individuals, but the time they're giving, the commitment they're giving, it's just those ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They're phenomenal, and they're running invariably they've got far more crew members than their whole-time counterparts than you might have if you're running a watch and you've got now, it used to be 6, maybe now 5, maybe now 4, depending on what service you're in. But ultimately, that management, some are got 20 crew members. They're one watch manager and they've got 20.
That's exactly it. So my local station, they're on call with 2 trucks and 21 firefighters on that on-call staff. And I say this when I was a manager on call and then transitioned into management levels in the whole time and being a watch manager and stuff like that. People were asking about, what's it like doing the on-call if they were whole time and they were thinking about going into it. And I said about how very different interactions are from an on-call perspective. For an example, if you do have a bump in culture on a whole-time station, you maybe got another 11 hours that day or another 6 hours to try and dissipate that, to try and understand it, to try and rectify it and find a place of understanding. But from an on-call perspective, you might have a disagreement, or you might have someone has a rift or something like that. They might not see each other for 2 weeks now, and they might only see each other for half an hour in that next fortnight. And your ability to navigate that and keep, just keep an effective workforce is very, very difficult. And equally, like I said before about the scales analogy, your interactions with all of these individuals, each one is significantly more important because you have less of them.
Oh, it's intense.
Exactly, and that's exactly it. And when you're seeing them, they're bringing their whole world with them because they've just had to leave their kids with the neighbor, or they've just, this has just happened or that's just happened, and they've got challenges at work or whatever it might be. They are, it requires, when done well, in my experience, it requires a huge breadth of emotional intelligence, and you have to have a really wide spectrum of abilities to build rapport and understand and empathize with people's challenges. So I agree with you, that it's a multifaceted skill set required to be a great watch commander on
with great
on-call stations.
100%, with great interpersonal skills. And you just touched on it then. So Sir Tom Windsor said in front of the Home Affairs Committee recently, talking about fire service, culture is also what happens when no one is looking.
Yes.
Now, that's never more true than in the context of an on-call fire station that might be there 2 to 3 hours on a drill night once a week, that may be a busy station, might get 500 calls a year, might see one another, disparate crew members here and there, but more likely, on average, 100 to 200 shouts per year for most on-call stations. And so they're rarely seeing one another.
Yeah.
Now, so the culture that's happening, which is informed by the ideas, values, and manifesting the practices, behaviours of that particular group of people that get together on that fire station, on that fire engine, on that shout, that's happening when no one is looking. Yeah. And yet the only person really who is ever looking is that local watch manager. And so if he's able to harmonise that crew and able to, as you say, have those conversations, have those intense moments where he's using his interpersonal skills to make sure the culture, or she, of course, absolutely.
No, you're right. Go on.
No, good call. That demonstrates how incredible they are. That they can, even just as individuals, be also resilient enough in that context to be able to manage all those different dynamics that are happening within the crews and the different characters. And culture is, in the on-call context, definitely what happens when no one is looking. And so it's even more important that we recognise it's informed by a local community, that the local and regional, we're amazing in this country, aren't we? That we've got a little small green island with so many different cultures, accents, all just, again, the fire service, all the same, but all so different. And it's,
UK is a melting pot of global diversity, especially when you do enter certain areas. It's just tremendous, because it used to be the land of promise, and I'm sure for many people it still is. We forget how lucky we are to have won the geographical lottery of where we were born. So it's harder if you haven't got that context. I've spoken to different people, like Christian was a fantastic example. He's lived in numerous different countries and experienced different cultures, and we can be very, very spoilt and have a bit of elitist mindset where we take for granted some of the incredible diverse cultures and innovations that have come to the UK that we simply take for granted but benefit us on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And sometimes the diversity within the on-call context is socioeconomic. It's actually people, it's farmers working with accountants, it's people from different stratas of society.
That's a great thing I wanted to ask you about, actually, because when we were speaking with Leanne Player, her episode hasn't come out at time of recording, but when we put this out, it will already be out. She lives in an area where predominantly more wealthy individuals, and I know around the area that I live in, because it's easy to commute to certain big cities where people get paid a lot of money. It's harder to recruit on-call people because the financial metric is not even a metric, because you're speaking to people that are, earning between 80 and 120,000 pounds a year, trying to incentivize them with a 100, 200, 500 pound a month retainer, whatever it might be, is not an incentivization. That's why the why behind why they do it is all the more important. And it really isn't just a financial metric.
No, that's right. Yeah. And one of the things I innovated with the research was this idea of the 3 R's cycle. What does the research suggest are the top 5 reasons why people join, remain, or leave? And doing that exercise, that thought exercise to begin with, showed that actually the only time salary comes into it is when you look at a little bit retention. But in terms of recruitment, it's never in the top 5 reasons why people want to join the fire and rescue service. They actually want this community. It's a sense of belonging. It's to do something bigger than themselves. It's the thing that we often won't talk about. It's excitement and status. They're in the top 5 for the. It's like, and I don't know whether you know this.
Status, yeah. Some people like that.
The
Because
French have
again, on-call
archetypes.
firefighters, they're known in their communities as a source of good and a moral compass. People, somebody that can approach for help. Everybody on my street knows that I'm a firefighter, and will come and knock on the door when someone's fallen over outside or someone's hurt themselves. And there's just that unspoken communal contract where you will help.
Yeah, and it's okay to acknowledge. Like I said, the French have 4 archetypes of on-call. They're equivalent on-call firefighters, and I think it's the hero, the helper, the fixer, and I think the other one is something like the community person, really.
Yeah.
But they acknowledge the hero. They acknowledge the fact that actually there's still people that really want to be out there in their communities if they can and if they're needed to be the hero. And I think it's still okay to celebrate that, really. And the research suggests it's worthwhile to do so. And then retention.
I think my favourite out of those 4 is usually the fixer. Like I love a hero, and maybe I fall into that archetype more, not because I think I am a hero, but I know, like, if someone's just having a really shit day, I love to think, oh, what needs doing? I'll do it. What needs carrying across those 3 fields? I'll do it. What needs? Actually, the most people I find most fascinating when I speak to on-call firefighters, certainly, but even a lot of whole time as well. To be fair, it's the tinkerer on the watch. It's the problem solver. It's the person that's found an innovation for a certain job or with a certain piece of equipment or, a certain way of working. Those people are bloody fascinating. Their minds. And again, from an on-call perspective, they're usually people that they work as an engineer at the local factory, or they're a mechanic, or they're farmers. Are incredibly innovative people. They are, because they need to get done. It needs to be done today. I need to find a way of working with the stuff that I've got lying about. I need to find a system of work. They are really great thinkers, out the box innovators.
That reminds me of a little academic experiment that was done a long time ago, where they asked a lot of people about. They basically gave people a description of a person, its main characteristics, and said, "Is this person a librarian or a farmer?"
Yeah,
and the stereotypical characteristics were things like thoughtfulness. Were things like taking their time, being patient, and it's engendered. The questions were structured in a way to engender you towards thinking, "Oh, that's a librarian. Clearly, they're smart, patient, caring." And all the time, it was kind of like saying, "Actually, no, these are the characteristics that other research suggests are those of farmers." Farmers make up a huge number of on-call firefighters, and like you say, we are my local station, terrific station. A huge number of them are farmers or work with, in agriculture, because I'm in a predominantly rural area, and they're just absolutely, problem solvers, caring, kind, considerate, patient. Like they're fantastic people, really. They go back to the 3R cycle for a minute. Those 5 reasons the research shows: retention and resignation. One of the reasons is economic. So the data from the Office for National Statistics that does retain information on why people leave the fire service is not that nuanced. It's often conflates the on-call with the whole time, and is looking at pensions data. So it looks at why people state on their declarations why they're leaving, and they cite economic reasons, which can be myriad, can't they? It can be because you're straitened for cash, because you're going somewhere else because you're going to get paid more money. So it's not detailed enough to really give great insights, but it does show that on call and whole time, a lot of people do leave for economic reasons. That's one of the top 5
do you
reasons.
think that that's always as true as well, though? And I'm not asking, just go with me for a second, because I think when the passion dies, we start to focus on other stuff. Or if you're not valued anymore, you start to focus on other things. I feel like when you're acknowledged and you're valued, like, if you're part of a Sunday team football club or something like that, if it's a great place to be, everyone loves being there, you're valued, everyone's happy to see you, you enjoy the games, whether you win or not, you stay. But when that bit leaves, or when that bit you're less acknowledged, or the team doesn't work very well, or people care less, or the place is left in a shower shit or whatever, then you start to focus on other stuff where you go, oh, you know what? I'm taking 3 hours out of my day to do this. So people say, oh, why are you leaving? Oh, because it's too far away, or because petrol costs too much to get there. Or I'm like, I don't think that's like a lag indicator. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
I
interesting.
believe it's probably the fact that the first thing went. Do you know what I mean? You didn't, you weren't valued anymore. You didn't enjoy being there. People didn't appreciate you. You weren't acknowledged. So I'm not saying that that's not true, because those economical indicators are definitely need acknowledging. And I want to ask you about Ireland in a minute, because they have a different model and stuff like that. And we obviously met one of the chiefs at a recent event, and
Yeah.
I'd never learnt about that before. But yeah, do you know what I'm saying? I don't know. I think sometimes that's when people look for a reason. Like, I see it when people want to move stations and they go, oh, well, it's just, it's closer to home, or it's not as busy anymore, or I want to try doing that skill set. But usually it's the fact that the team is no longer working very well together, or they don't feel acknowledged, or they've had a bad experience. Sometimes, not always, but.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the economic factors are only one of those top 5 reasons. And you've just spoke to almost all the other top 5 reasons why people retain. Yeah, you've nailed it, because you can. Invariably, what happens with research and data analysis is you're kind of confirming what people that are very knowledgeable and they're in that environment or context already do know intuitively, or like you just did, excellently able to articulate it. And then what I can do is often provide that background, that research, to confirm what's being said, really. And that's where,
which is what's needed. We kind of alluded to it at the beginning, but it's that data, that data provided evidence-based strategic thinking, because that's what the true decision makers need to validate some of these decisions, to actually help.
They do. And I've
rightly so as well. Otherwise, we'll start spending money on stuff just because viscerally we think it's the right thing to do, but you've got no data to support it. Then how do you know if it works or not? Because you're not tracking it. I bet it must have been really hard for you to get the data from a lot of these places, because a lot of fire and rescue services were not great at keeping data.
Yeah, well, the first point, I suppose the extent to which an evidence-based approach helps senior leaders to influence the decision-making of senior stakeholders is really important. So within the context of the fire and rescue service, all our chiefs, our assistant chiefs, all those senior leaders have got to always be dealing with Green Book, or those senior stakeholders, those heads of HR, heads of finance. And sometimes people like me can come in and give them the right type of research and data to support their
local government as well, heads of council and local government and fire authorities, where they can't just go, oh yeah, no, I've been chatting on stations and we think this, and they go, exactly. based on what, please present to the council what you're basing this on. You can't just go, we all think it's the right thing.
Yeah, and so when people don't even understand what on-call firefighters are, let alone that the data shows that they're increasingly the predominant means by which the fire service provides its services to the public, and you're starting from that point, it's really hard for senior leaders to engage with those senior stakeholders in a nuanced way, or with the data and evidence that support those strategic decisions that can create the changes that are needed to deal with the modern world, really. And so I do empathize with that senior leaders in terms of trying to drive change. I'm trying to help with the research and the data, really, and the evidence. To answer your question about obtaining the data, it's always a challenge. But actually, there's quite a lot in the fire and rescue service when you expand your lens beyond that, like on-call, that searching on-call firefighters or retained firefighters, and you actually go out into the world doing a quite sophisticated set of searches and looking for research that is analogous in other countries. And then the data itself.
Great, because like you say, because sometimes we're just caught up in language. We just frame things differently. We're actually, like you've alluded to earlier, there is a great deal of work systems with similar challenges that can be validated as useful evidence, but just because we don't know it's there because we call it something different.
That's right. And it's all there waiting to find. And as you said at the start, there's so much information and we're just overwhelmed with it. You can find anything, can't you, if you search for it? But you kind of need skills. You need those skills that I've been fortunate enough to be able to learn.
Ask better questions, get better answers. This echoes back to the incident command mindset when people go, are there any risks and hazards here? And the farmer goes, no. And you go, okay, is there anything in that building that could cause harm to my firefighter? Oh yeah, there's a fucking massive bandsaw when you walk through the front door, and then there's 40 litres of chemical and fertilizer on the right-hand side. Ask better questions, get better answers.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to, and that is the whole modus operandi of an academic research approach. Is saying, what's your primary question?
Yeah.
What question are you trying to answer? I was trying to answer, what are the significant factors that influence on-call fire engine availability? And when you do that, you go down and then you create a few more questions and say, well, what do I need to ask in order to answer that primary question? And then you're just following that tree, really. Yeah, it's the right question is absolutely key. So the data, there's a lot out there, just available to everybody, the public, through the Office for National Statistics and through the publications from individual fire and rescue services. But ultimately, you do have to get into the fire service and then learn what each fire service has available. And so my job has been to, one, identify what's available. And you can either do that by using what we call a survey data tool. So I've constructed a bank of questions that ask the senior leaders and stakeholders the questions that get the information that I will need to answer that primary research question. And they can send that out to within the organization to streamline that process. And then they say, right, here you go, there's the answer to those questions, and I get a certain amount of data. That gives me a contact with somebody within the organization, like a single point of contact for that data set. And then we can interrogate what else might be available, because some services have very little available. So then it's my job to go, well, let me explain how maybe we can go about acquiring the data in the first instance in a smart way. So the
data is streaming in all the time. That's the beauty of stuff. Yeah. It's not like, we're going to launch the business again next week and do a run of 2 months and we'll try and capture the evidence from that product run. The product is going on all the goddamn time. It is constantly flowing. It's just about throwing up the right nets, isn't it, to capture the right data in the right areas, because it's all flowing over your head.
Yeah, and you've talked about this before. I've heard you on different podcasts talking about the how you've recorded availability, how the tally systems and stations you worked at, and the disparity there. And if we go back to like a system like Fire Service Rota, a means by which to manage availability, skills, strategically workforce plan, very, very sophisticated technology, great technology. Some services use that, whereas other services up until very recently use like tally-based.
This is what I mean. So that's what I love about Fire Service Rota. It's the usability of the software. Is because you can easily go, people aren't interested, or people aren't, they don't care enough to track availability. No, you're just not giving them the right tools. You've made it really difficult for somebody to interact with that system of work, or with that interface doesn't work for that person. And that's what I love about the Fire Service Rota system, is it's so user-friendly.
Yeah, and it's like you're doing a podcast for firefighters, and Core always talks about its software created for firefighters. Yeah. My research is coming at it really from the perspective of firefighters and on-call firefighters. Let's go from that bottom up. And the key thing that the research shows is that actually that's the smart approach culturally, and it's the smart approach certainly when you're looking at something like your availability software, because firefighters first and foremost need to have a flexible means by which to immediately book on or book off. So Fire Service Rota strength is it's just got an app-based system that's dead easy, and within 2 clicks you're booked on or booked off.
That's what was really good about him when I was having a chat, is because I immediately fell into the trap of things I've done in business before, where I was like, oh mate, this is usable in loads of other sectors. Imagine when you start doing it in the NHS and how big that'd be. And he was like, no, we're not going to do that, because we would start to dilute the value from what is our key stakeholder, from what is our real ideal end user, because we would end up trying to, and he wouldn't use this terminology, but just try and bastardize a system to fit another model. And it's like the idea you try and please everybody and end up pleasing nobody.
Oh, he's doing something that's meaningful and not expedient. And that's
a great way of saying it.
Philosophy at the heart of our meaning crisis, our troubled world where we're living in isolation. If more people just said, I'm going to do what's meaningful, not what's expedient. And I think more are, and that's what we're seeing, the great resignation. We're seeing the great reprioritization. COVID shocked people, and they went, oh shit, health shock alert. I need to do something meaningful, even if it wasn't, and hopefully the real tragedy didn't befall them during COVID. But even those that just saw it happening, didn't even get it, just thought, oh my God, it could be me. This is it. Right, let's do something meaningful and not just what's expedient. And so you're right, Fire Service Rota and Core kind of thought, and stay true to that fire service vision. And I definitely know that I would be less effective as a researcher now if I was doing something that I didn't think was meaningful. I used to work for All Mail. I used to work now, and like you, Pete, have a background in other businesses that might pay more money or might be all about a business and a corporate focus, really. But I want to do this. I love the fire service. I love the on-call fire service. I know it. I understand it. And I want to use my skills to help it surmount the challenges that it's facing, which often, and I think this is another message I'd really like to use this platform to get out to the world, is that we take a lot on ourselves in the fire service, and senior leaders really do. They go, right, this is a problem. I've got to fix it. Like you say, practical firemanship. We're getting out there on the RTC. We're going to get that roof off. It's absolutely, we're going to do that. Whereas actually, many of the challenges for the on-call service in particular are a product of social, economic, cultural trends that are outside the control of those people. And we've got to have that broader philosophy of saying, let's be open to information and make some smart decisions using data and research, but let's also be kind to ourselves and be fair to ourselves that we can't necessarily influence this a huge amount. I think the LFB stuff is huge about that, really. We're looking to our leaders for leadership, quite rightly, but God, man, culture is a big, big thing to handle and to turn around. And the idea that as an individual, you can influence culture.
Well, like you say, I think it's just getting a better appreciation for what's in your sphere of control. Because I can have a massive influence on the culture between Steve and Pete on this conversation. I've not got 100% influence, but I've got a bloody big influence on the culture within that. And if we all just shrank our sphere of influence down to what is realistically achievable, then, and that's the whole analogy, if we all just put one pebble in together, then we'll move the entire beach very, very quickly. Or we all just focus on that small element of it. It can become very deflating if we try and widen our responsibility, our belief of our social responsibility to fixing this entire thing. I mean, I always speak about it on the fire service, leave it better than you found it. I would hate to see our generation being the one that sees the on-call system or retain system fail, because ultimately it can't. This is what I always say about the emergency services. We can't just go, this business isn't feasible, let's pack it up. It's not a fucking option. We've got to make it work.
As we've just seen, the data shows that 80% of the landmass in the UK is supported by the on-call fire service. It's more than half the fire stations in the UK are on-call fire stations, and it's also, it costs 90% less than the whole time duty system. So whilst that's certainly not my rationale for thinking that it needs to be supported more, fundamentally, as Sir Ken Knight did the primary calculation nationally for that, to work that out, that means that in a world in which it's increasingly capitalist, consumerist, economically driven, we have got to recognise that those pressures are on our leaders and that they have got to make those cost-effective decisions. And actually, the cost-effective way to provide a fire service is an on-call fire service in 100%. Rural locations, in certain locations. So there's never going to be an economic case to put a whole-time fire station in the middle of, rural Wales. As much as some of us would like to think, well, we all pay enough taxes to have a whole-time, but the public often thinks that every fire station is manned by a whole-time crew. It's there 24/7. We all know that's never going to really happen. No. So we need to support those rural stations that are on call in particular to be sustainable. And the research suggests we can. Everything that I've looked at and the innovations that we've come up with that we're going to talk about in the future that cover all that whole range of recruitment through to culture. There are services. One of the other ways I looked at the research is identified the top percentile services for availability and tried to look into their best practices and their HMI reports to see if there was some kind of common denominator of success, to see if all the services with above 90% availability were using one particular availability software, maybe. Okay. I thought that might be a thing. That was my researcher bias. I quickly learned, no, they're all using different availability software. Okay. So it's not all about the availability.
Well, it will be a factor, but it's what percentage of that success is attributed to that.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And that's, and
because I could say what makes me a fit and healthy person, and people go, oh, well, you work out every day. Okay, that's only one factor, because there's lots of people that exercise every day who are chronically ill, very poor relationships, very poor mental focus. It's it's that marginal gains perspective, isn't it? What part of the success is down to this That's it, a specific portion of it.
You make it about money, it doesn't really, in the long term, make it more sustainable, really. Because how much is enough as well, and how much even people are like you, whole-time firefighters. There's a lot are not getting enough to be able to just survive a cost of living crisis. And how much is enough, really? In an on-call context, again, all the research suggests that it's not even one of the primary motivators, really. People are doing it for other things. And so we've got to really recognize that as a society, I think, more, really. And that was another thing the research from Holland showed, and a couple of other pieces of research that suggest the extent to which a fire and rescue service that has on-call firefighters or volunteer firefighters can be successful recruiting and retaining its staff is directly contingent upon the extent to which the local community values its fire and rescue service.
That's it.
It makes recruitment so easy when you've got on-call firefighters at that station talking in the pub, talking on the street, talking about positively, saying, yeah, it's great, we do this, we do that. So that culture of positivity and that certain, and then know that they've got an audience within the local community because they do still value the role of the fire and rescue service. And it's been made really difficult, Pete, because we've been victims of our own success in a way, because we've been so good at protect and prevention work. We have had less and less activity and less incidents. So that's less and less opportunity for many local fire stations to get out in the community, to be seen doing the job and having those meaningful interactions that augment the value and the perception of the value of the fire and rescue service. So in the absence of that, the research suggests we've kind of got to upregulate our community work. We've really got to go, let's chuck some money. If we're going to spend to save, let's not spend to save on salaries, other than because it recognises the value. I think there is a case to say pay could go up for on-call firefighters and firefighters generally, just as a reflection of a proxy of value of society of those people.
But this is what I'm saying about the podcast as well, because I almost see this as a sense of community engagement, because it's like we've closed the doors, or as communication styles with public have changed, we have not kept pace with that. So when we look at social media, or when we look at different platforms and different ways to communicate, because we haven't kept up to date with that, we've accidentally shut the doors and kind of become very elusive in how we acknowledge and share the success of the fire and rescue services with the wider community. That's why I love what we do here so much, because it gives people hopefully an insight into there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of people working very, very hard to keep the community safe and to ensure the longevity and sustainability of what we're trying to do to protect and serve our communities. But if we don't talk about it, no one's going to know. Do you know what I mean? And then we can't expect to be acknowledged for it or recognized because we're not talking about it.
And it's part of the humility of the service, isn't it? We're not self-aggrandizing. We're not good, but we're not also good at self-marketing. I often joke that Fireman Sam has done more for the value of the fire and rescue service in England and the UK and around the world than we've done ourselves sometimes by actually self-promoting. We live in a world now where everybody and everything from influencers to marketing is just all about self-promotion. You can't be shy anymore.
People, when they go, oh no, we don't need to, or anything like that, well, then don't be surprised when you do start struggling with the recruitment and stuff, because we're not as, when you really think about it and you sort of carve out time for a conversation around it, most members of the public will say how much they value fire service, the police, the NHS, paramedics, military, whatever it might be. But we almost don't create space and or a platform for that acknowledgement.
You're 100%. And I think that's one of the reasons why, or two things, the public perception data embedded within the HMI inspection reports that asks the public what their perception of the fire and rescue service is, we must say that's always so high. On average, I think it's like 87% across the country. We are still absolutely positively perceived by the public when measured using a metric. Now, that's not their methodology is not perfect, don't get me wrong, and the questions they ask sometimes, there could be some more information around that, but fundamentally, we've still got high value in the eyes of the public, I think. And then to add to that, the work of an NFCC. the work by Dr. Ian Greatbatch, by Dan with the EVO UK, the Economic and Social Value of the Fire and Rescue Service, is so, it's a fledgling methodology and a first approach to try and foreground this need to justify the value of the fire and rescue service. And it's maybe for some people couched in uncomfortable terms like economics and should we put a price on the value of a life and should we, but we live in that world, Pete, don't we, where everything, value is invariably linked to value for money. It almost is the first collocation that pops in your head. Somebody says value.
That's very emotive, though. That really triggers a lot of firefighters when they go, shouldn't have to prove value for money, or we shouldn't have to justify. That's one. We shouldn't have to justify why we're doing stuff.
I agree.
You're going to have to, okay, because someone is going to apply a metric template to what you're doing. So get involved with what that metric's going to be, or give them something to measure you on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll just see what you're doing. They won't see the impact.
I agree with all those firefighters. I agree with we shouldn't have to, but we have to.
Yes.
We shouldn't have to.
You're already in that sphere. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
That Pete Wakefield will turn up on a fire engine with some people to cut somebody out of a car, to save somebody in a house fire, to just help somebody in their direst moment of need. It should be axiomatic that that's valuable to us as members of society, and that we're privileged to live in a society and within a culture that has a history of valuing that role and foregrounded it to the point that we get everybody in society to pay for it through our taxes. So we're going, it's there, it's a mainstay. We're going to tax you on it, nothing surer than death and taxes. We deal with both of them. We get the money for the taxes and we deal with the death, and we're the mainstay. That, because it's got that economic basis, fundamentally, we now have to argue for its economic benefit. And Absolutely. It underpins that economic need, and things like the economic and social value, it does. It's really meaningful. We need to get it out there a bit to let the world know, actually, you can measure it, and then add that to those local community initiatives. Those using your fire station as a community hub.
Yes, that's where we definitely need to get back to. I feel like we've wandered a little bit away from that. Used to be so much of that. I think when people did acknowledge and value the fact that so many of our stations are on-call stations, it was inherently more of a community-based hub, because those people lived in the communities and they brought in all of these social activities that were valued by the community, and the fire service would play a pivotal role in leading, developing, engaging, and facilitating those activities. As we've tried to get maybe, I don't know, a little bit more professional or a little bit more politically driven, we've kind of gone away from, and we've closed a lot of the doors of our fire stations. And we just need to turn that a little bit. We just need to turn our focus back towards the needs of the community a little bit more, because I know firefighters, we want to do that, and we're probably doing it already in many places, but we do need to share it. We need to record it. We need to show how it's doing. We need to show the value of it.
I think that we are, and that, so this is absolutely not saying we're not doing enough of it. I think we're doing a huge amount of it, and every day, whether you go on, Twitter, online, you see, Christmas particularly, how engaged the fire service is with the local community. We're phenomenal, but an interesting research project would be to establish the extent to which we've increased that community engagement in the presence of a decrease in natural activity. So as I said before, really, that presence of the fire engine with firefighters on it doing something operational within that community, as those have dropped, which they have across the country, thankfully, have we compensated? A bit like in training, when you're from training, Pete, you always say, operational experience, to some extent, the drop in it can be ameliorated by an increase in training. Yeah. That's how we do. We have to. That's the only way we can. Only tools in our box,
training,
really.
Simulation,
training. But then we go, we haven't got time for the training, and we haven't got there's other issues. But that's how I see the community engagement dealing with the drop in activity levels from an availability perspective, because it's all about that, really, and that community involvement that's going to help us through these challenging times, really. It's all right, researchers like me and going, there's data that can help us with recruitment and understanding our widest possible pool of recruits at each fire station, and using them as measures to adopt and adapt recruitment strategies. We can look at diversity profiles by including data from the Office for National Statistics. We can do all these clever little things, but fundamentally, I think culture does trump strategy. As a smarter man than I said, and when we get culture right, And I don't, not again talking about the big cultural issues at the moment. I mean, in the context of the on-call being entrenched in the local community, presupposing there's an adequate number of people to be recruited, everything else really does follow. And there's lots of other stuff behind that, which I'm sure we can touch on in the future, really. From fire cadets through to community hubs you just mentioned that can be sort of reinvigorated maybe in order to help us with that.
That is that first big domino to tip, though. I love it.
Yeah, cool.
Steve, thank you so much for your time today, mate. We've gone in so many beautiful directions. I've absolutely loved it, and I'm super excited. I know we've, as again, I'm sort of benefiting from your kind of input in the fact that we have gone about some of our communications in more of a strategic method. So I'm really excited in the fact that we're going to delve deeper into some of the subjects and topics that we've discussed today. But you've been so generous with your time, mate. Thank you so much for your time this morning. What I realize, and I don't want to leave people out on a limb here, because we've not even gone there, is just for a second, people will want to, before we have our next interaction, go and learn a little bit more about the 1,000. I've made 2 pages of notes just speaking with you this morning, so I imagine there may have been some people frantically making those same level of notes. But in the absence of that, they can actually go and find out a little bit more information. So can you just give us an understanding of where people can go to find a bit more information about yourself? Because you have gone into the lengths, you've written many, many interesting blogs on these subjects, and you also obviously operate in a business capacity yourself. So where can people go to just learn a little bit more about that and yourself?
Quite simply, the best way to get in touch with me or to dig down into some of the research and some of the ideas that we've been able to come up with is to look at Re-enkindle online. So Re-enkindle at fireserviceresearch.co.uk. That's effectively the separate business that I've created to support the fire sector with that capacity we talked about at the start, really, so that we can use research and data to provide some solutions, particularly for the on-call. So a couple of blogs recently I've written on the on-call landscape and about that research background really are there online. And
what I love most about some of the stuff you've written as well, though, is that it's validated and you put all of your references in under there, but it's almost a place where you've wandered out into the forest, collected all of these nuggets and managed to organize them in a way that even a hairy-ass firefighter like myself can begin to understand some of the see the forest through the trees, for want of a better description. You know what I mean? And it's not just like, certain blogs that I read where it's just someone's really passionate description of their perception of something. You've come at it very much from that research and mindset. So again, from firefighter all the way up to the decision makers, as again, I know a few services have already reached out and utilized your support if they want help trying to see the forest through the trees. That's probably the best place to go. And we will link it in the notes of this, so if people have a glance down underneath, they'll be able to jump over.
Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't always lend itself well to great marketing, Pete, because you can't put it all into a little nugget and a little strapline, a little snazzy blog and a little just a couple of paragraphs. Doing it the longhand way, I get that, but I feel a duty.
What's needed though, mate?
Well, yeah, and when we're talking about such a complex context, even the solutions are then sometimes a little bit complex. And we're also talking about something which is fundamental to society and culture and speaks to so many things that I feel a duty to always reference things and to show that I'm not, there's a famous saying, the plural of anecdote is data. Throughout my time in the fire service, and I know we talked about before about ego and so on, we are also full of anecdote, aren't we? We can sit around all day in the watch room or in the mess, and I think this and I think that, and I think loads of stuff, man. Yeah. But it's not what I think, and I probably don't even think the right stuff. But I go to the research and I go to
the self-awareness
and say, this is what it
back
says.
It up. Yeah,
and then try and put a story to it that we can, within the sector, understand. And so, sometimes it takes a lot of delving into it. It's heavy reading, but at least what I'm trying to do is just bring that narrative to celebrate the on-call and to say that, there's challenging times ahead, but they're challenging times for everybody in employment. They're challenging times, across the spectrum and across the globe. I also know that there's research out there and that there's a way to handle data that provides solutions so that we can keep the model sustainable. So that these ordinary people can keep doing extraordinary things, man. So thank you for your time, Pete. It's been great talking to you, and hopefully get to talk to you again in the future.
We will do, mate, over the next few weeks. I know we have a couple of little chats planned in so people can follow this journey, and if they have any specific topics that they'd love to go into and perhaps have not had an opportunity to explore the data themselves, please feel free to send any in, and we will find that forest through the tree. I know Steve will go into the attic and find that nugget of the study that's actually gone into what we need to know, and he'll be able to find the solutions within it. But I really appreciate your time, mate. Send my love to the family, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Cheers, Pete.
Firefighters podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continuing, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.